Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with two very special guests. Our first guest today is Dr. Cynthia-li, and she's here to share with us her new book, Brave New Medicine, a doctor's unconventional path to healing her autoimmune illness. Now, Dr. Li is a board-certified physician in internal medicine, having completed her medical training at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. Her practice has centered on public health in underserved communities such as HIV/AIDS in San Francisco and Doctors Without Borders in rural China. She's also been involved in environmental health and evolutionary health. She's a member of the American Board of Internal Medicine and the Institute for Functional Medicine. In 2017, she joined the faculty of the Joint Medical Program between the University of California, San Francisco and the University of California, Berkeley in co-teaching the Healer's Art program, which trains medical students to develop the art of healing. Her family, friends, and community circles are wide-reaching and intersect academia, public policy, public health, environmental health, integrative health, and complementary medicine. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Cynthia-li.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, what a joy it is to have you here. And my goodness, your book is filled with so much great information. Once I picked it up, I couldn't put it down. And there are times where it's heartbreaking, but I think a lot of people this will really resonate with.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, as I trained as a doctor in internal medicine, and when I went through my own health journey, it really struck me how much happens between the appointments. And, you know, so it's not just the health, you know, the symptoms and the challenges in isolated format, which is how we like to really address it in the exam room. But it's really the lived experience, you know. So I think the question I've gotten the most since my book has been out is, why did you decide to write it this way, you know? And it strikes people as very different than a how-to book. And I said, well, you know, it's really, we live our lives in terms of stories that are unfolding. And so I think the most humbling experience for me, coming from a trained doctor's background, was this lived experience of illness, which is very different than how we reduce disease down in the clinic setting.
Yeah, it's interesting when we, you know, figure our whole lives that, well, hey, we're healthy and everything's going great. When something starts to show up, a lot of times people will just write that off as like, oh, maybe it's not a big deal, or, you know, maybe I ate spicy foods the night before, instead of, you know, kind of really looking at the full picture going, well, wait a minute, this might be something more.
Right, exactly. I think as a culture, we are very detached from our bodies. And, you know, a lot of people even who are very active in their bodies, right, who are hiking and biking or swimming or dancing, there often is still a detachment just because of how ingrained that the way that we separate mind, body, and spirit in our culture is from such a young age, and it becomes this invisible force. And so, you know, a lot of my patients and even doctors now who are I'm in conversation with about how do we heal, how do we address health on a deeper and more holistic level, is really, you know, usually when we think that we're in our bodies, we're using our bodies, but we're not really connecting to our bodies in a way that feels present. And I, you know, so I usually ask for raise of hands. Well, how many of you go for a walk or go for a run, you know, with headphones in, or you know, earbuds in, or talking to somebody, or your mind thinking about other things that happened earlier in the day or that's going to happen the next day? And so there suddenly becomes an awareness that, whoa, you know, we're not really connecting to our bodies. And that's a, you know, movement and fitness is one aspect, but in terms of very basic things like eating, Most of the time now, or it's very, very common, is we're multitasking. And even if we are sitting present with our food, we are not connecting with our bodies, with digesting. To say nothing of, our food and where our food comes from. And so the more we begin to link together that all our systems, within our bodies, and the micro ecosystems that live in our gut and in our skin and in our airways, that our body's systems are connected to the systems that surround us, right? The environmental systems and the community systems that are in place, then that's really the area, that's the level at which deep healing occurs.
Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because it really, we start looking at our own health, and I think in a more broad and it's a different perspective than just like, oh, I didn't break my arm, so I'm okay. And when you talk about, in your book, you talk about autoimmune, and so for some people that might be kind of even though it's not a new term, it might be a term they're not quite familiar with. So I'd like for you to kind of share a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, autoimmunity, just in the most basic sense, means that the body's immune system is attacking and therefore creating inflammation against the body. So it is, in lay circles, sometimes you hear the phrase self-attacking self, or your body's attacking itself. Which is, there are so many different layers to that. One aspect that I learned, so first of all, the notion, I remember when I experienced, whoa, my body's attacking itself. It feels like a betrayal. There's a deep sense of betrayal, and it's not unique to autoimmune conditions. I hear that a lot from patients who've had cancer, who've had, neurodegenerative conditions like, dementia and Parkinson's. There's this sense like all of a sudden something happened and my body's now betraying me. And so one of the foundational points that was a turning point for me was relearning, going back into Pathology 101 and realizing, whoa, chronic diseases don't just happen overnight. I mean, our symptoms might feel like they started overnight, or the diagnosis might have come out of nowhere, but that the vast majority of chronic disease begins as subtle imbalances years and sometimes decades before the diagnosis or the symptoms are necessarily, disrupting our lives. So it's been a stepwise progression or a dance that our body's been trying to do. It begins initially as some kind of damage or injury to cells and then tissues, and then our body's trying to repair, right? So if our bodies are able to repair fully and then restore back to health, then the chronic disease does not develop. And so when it's constantly imbalanced and there's more injury than there is repair, then the chronic disease develops, progresses, and then continues to develop. We usually think of, you get the diagnosis of diabetes or an autoimmune condition, you're going to have it for the rest of your life. And so that was another big revelation for me, having gone through my health journey, was to realize actually this is reversible. And so what I had been trained to believe was not true in terms of chronicity. The other piece that was very helpful and eye-opening for me was to learn that when we call something an autoimmune disease, your immune system is attacking itself. If we go deeper into many, many autoimmune conditions, if not most or all, that the immune system is actually trying to get rid of something that we hadn't sort of as a medical society identified. So, for example, in autoimmune thyroid disease, which is what I had, There is research that's been shown that Epstein-Barr virus has been found inside the thyroid cells, and so is in some cases, or in many cases, the immune system of the person trying to respond to the viruses that are inside that gland. And we're also learning that environmental chemicals and toxins, like mercury is an example. We typically think of mercury, it builds up, in the body's tissues and the brain and in various organs, and at a certain level, it will cause problems. And while that holds true, there's increasing evidence that some people, not all, will develop an autoimmune response. So their immune system is actually triggered by even small amounts of the heavy metal in the body. But then the felt experience is, right, that they're inflamed. They're feeling fatigued, they have malaise, they're not, maybe some brain fog. And that this is the immune system trying to respond to something foreign in the body. So when we say self-attacking self, it often is much more layered than just that.
Well, thank you for going into detail about that. And it brings up, one of the sections in your book, you talk about just how the emotional and physical stresses would cause this inflammation. You talked about not getting enough sleep, and, that caused inflammation and anxiety. And then it was like this kind of this circle that never ended, the greater inflammation, the poorer the sleep, and on and on and on it went. And so I can see where some people would get to a point where they're very frustrated with how they can even break these cycles, because it seems like they're just so all-encompassing.
Yes, so chronic disease can be a real spiral downhill and very quickly. And the saving grace is that healing is also a spiral, and you can enter the spiral at many different points, depending on what you're able to do and what you're willing to do. And also finding the right, support system, whether it's family and friends or a healthcare practitioner that is going to support your healing is vital to that. A lot of so there are ways in which we can identify and try to remove the causes of chronic disease. And, a huge part of that is stress, which can be emotional, mental, or physical trauma. And then a poor diet. So a diet that's really generating more inflammation. Those are the two biggies. And then infections, as I was mentioning, like the Epstein-Barr virus, sort of stealth infections like that, environmental chemicals, and then allergens. Those are the 5 classes that we try to identify and really try to reduce as much as possible. Then there's several elements to support optimal wellness. So these are the elements that support the body to then, if we give the body what it needs to function optimally, the body will heal itself, right? Healing becomes a side effect. So, as you mentioned, right? Getting enough sleep, and, that's a huge thing. And not just sleep, but really regulating the circadian rhythm. This is an innate rhythm that every organ in the body has. And then it's in sync with nature's rhythms, outside of us. And so we tend to think of this, I know I did for myself. I thought, oh God, like getting in sync with the rhythms of the sun and the moon, and this just feels, kind of woo-woo out there. But we are creatures that are bound by nature's laws. And I know for myself, I would tend to forget that. I would, want, my mind and my spirit were sort of boundless, and my body just had to kind of keep up. And so for me, it was just recognizing, oh, I'm in a body. My body is finite and it operates in a particular way. So learning to really tune into the circadian rhythms of my body. And and there are lots of great resources out there, but it's it can be really simple, and a lot of people have done it with their children. Right? You feed them on a particular schedule. They start their days at a particular time or time frame, and same thing with nighttime. So some of these things, these shifts, are very straightforward, and they're almost so simple that we discount them, the power of them. But what it does really ask us is to pause and to change behavior. And that's a really, really difficult thing. So, and another thing is what we eat and how we eat. Getting enough time in nature. And if we don't have a lot of time in nature, then can we bring elements of nature into our homes, into our workspace? It can be something from a houseplant to hanging up pictures of nature. So some of these changes are very minor, but they can have big impacts on our day-to-day life and our capacity to heal.
So a lot of the things you're talking about now seem to kind of go against the belief system that the medical field tends to have when we kind of look at the human body in its totality. I know that you were labeled a difficult patient for that reason and many others, and it's interesting how that's taking you to the place that you are now. Through all of your experience, how do you think this has impacted the way you look at medicine today?
I definitely see the limitations of Western medicine, and but I also look at it with great compassion. I see how the way in which doctors have been trained is in many ways one cycle of trauma, and it gets perpetuated onto our patients. And so it's, there was this full immersion basically in how not to be healthy and how to just survive in a very, very rigorous medical boot camp. And so that mode of living and being becomes ingrained in us, in our bodies, subconsciously too. So then, we just keep pushing. We just keep pushing, and we've got 15, minutes, 20 minutes. There's an incredible demand to have a quick solution in that time frame, and there's tremendous pressure. So I see both the limitations, and I can certainly critique it, but it's really through a heart of compassion. And my real hope is to heal the system so that all patients everywhere, that there's going to be access to care that fully supports treating the whole person. It will need to begin with the providers.
Yeah. Our doctors are under so much stress. I can understand why a lot of them are just feeling overwhelmed as it is, having just such a small time frame to come up with all these profound answers to symptoms that people are having.
Right. And, and I've been speaking a lot to mainstream doctor groups. And the first thing I say is, well, just giving a patient your full attention is like incredibly healing. We discount some of the things that can be done immediately now, and shifting questions from, like what's the matter, which is important, but it really emphasizes like what's wrong and what's broken and what needs to be fixed. Whereas shifting the question to, well, what really matters to you and what do you want out of your life, then begins to build a partnership, which also, relays to the patient that, oh, yeah, some stuff is going to be asked of me, and I'm going to need, what am I going to do? What am I willing to do? What can I do in my life the way that it is that, I have to, what can I let go of? and what needs to change. And so there begins to have a two-way dialogue as opposed to a top-down dialogue. And, while as a trained doctor, we certainly know much more information actually in some ways, a lot of my patients are teaching me stuff. There's no way that a doctor could know everything that's available out there now. There's way too much information. And a lot of cutting edge science takes years. I think the average, when there was an analysis done, the average, science takes about 17 years to be translated over into clinical medicine. So I'm very open to my patients bringing me information, looking at the sources, of course, very carefully. But that's something that is, usually received with a lot of hesitation and also judgment. Why are you bringing me this? You don't trust my judgment. So there really needs to begin a new kind of dialogue between the patient and the doctor.
I think that's a great new paradigm that needs to take place, and you're probably on the cusp of making these kind of discussions, just more readily accepted, where people are going, here we have a doctor who has also become the patient herself, and what a unique perspective she has in both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And, doctors are, we're all human beings. A lot of doctors have found themselves on the other side of the bedside. I think what made my situation unique, just in terms of writing about it and being public about it, was that I really had become a patient in which, the paradigm I trained had no role, had no answers. And so it forced me to begin to ask new questions. If I had conditions where there was a medicine to not necessarily cure me, but to help me feel better and just to get on with my life day to day, I probably would have received that gladly.
I'm sure. You look at that and going, gosh, okay, medicine should have this all figured out, but it doesn't have everything figured out.
No, it does not. It does not by a long shot. And I think part of it is fundamentally is actually embracing uncertainty, which is a very, very challenging thing to do. The way that we're trained is in the hospital. The vast majority of our training is in the hospital, including for internal medicine, the specialty of chronic disease. And I had not realized that what I was really being trained in was acute exacerbations of chronic conditions, right? If you have strokes or pneumonia, these are really flares of chronic conditions. But, in the outpatient setting, we're really meeting patients in their day-to-day lives and trying to increase quality of care, which is a completely different ballgame. I realized I had very, very little tools. And, we need to begin always with food because we are, everyone is eating. Most people are eating many times a day, and we're constantly exposed to this. So inflammatory foods and processed foods are going to perpetuate, every day this inflammatory cycle. And whereas nutrient-dense foods and whole foods are going to be healing every time we take them in. So it becomes a very, very large part of what the body needs. We're just giving the body substrates and nutrients it needs to operate optimally. And so medical education really needs to begin by talking about food and feeding doctors wholesome, nutrient-dense foods.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of patient re-education at that point too, because I'm sure you get people who say, well, every morning I have to have my coffee that has the, processed creamer in it. That's the only way I can have it. but it's like, what's more important, having something that your body is really reacting to or obtaining a greater level of health?
Right, exactly. And that's going to be a very individual question for everyone. And, for myself, I had defined health as functionality. So even when I wasn't feeling well, as long as I was fully functional and I was living my life the way that I had imagined it and wanted it, then I was, quote, healthy. And it really wasn't until, right, like a complete breakdown, right, of being housebound and bedbound that I realized, I mean, in hindsight, that that is far from being healthy.
What does healthy mean to you today? I think this would be a very empowering answer for many people to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still trying to understand what it is in terms of an embodied experience, because as a doctor, ultimately, I am very interested in a very ordinary, concrete definition and experience of health. And, from a conceptual standpoint, it is really a balance, like a real harmony between the mind, the body, and the spirit. And, spirit is not, I don't mean that in a religious term, but really of the heart and of, emotional balance as well. What does that mean in an embodied way, or even down at the level of the cells? Is that every cell is doing it. These biochemical reactions that are happening. I don't even know how many billions, per second. They're humming along. So there is a sense of balance and harmony. They're literally humming and working. They're turning on when their particular set of cells are turned on by the circadian rhythm, and they turn off, and everything is in perfect synchronicity. And that is a state that is achievable. It's achievable by everybody.
I love that, because I think a lot of people, we get to different points in our lives where we have one kind of health crisis or another, and to be able to have hope, to be able to walk out of that, I think is a real important thing.
Mm-hmm. And beyond, I mean, the thing is that individual health is inextricably linked, as I said earlier, to really the health and the balance and the rhythms that are beyond us as well. So, I mean, I was really talking about individual health, but the organism, right, the living organism of our communities and of our environment is really vital as well. It's, one of my favorite biologists, E.O. Wilson, has this great saying, one planet, one experiment. And it's really challenging to be a healthy individual or to thrive as a species when our planet is not healthy and in balance.
Oh, that's without a doubt. Well, during this whole process, I know you met a lot of very interesting people who really left this great impression on you. Why don't you share one of them with us and just your walk with that one person?
Well, yeah, I had a lot of great teachers that presented themselves to me in one form or another, and some of them were medical doctors, but the vast majority were not. And I guess I will talk about my midwife, who came at a time when it was during my second pregnancy, which was very difficult. My second pregnancy was also the onset of chronic fatigue syndrome and a complete dysfunction of my autonomic nervous system called dysautonomia. So this left me really bedbound for the first 6 months of that pregnancy, and then housebound for the next couple of years. And I had chronic vertigo and debilitating fatigue. So, we were just desperate for support, and had a wonderful obstetrician who recommended this midwife that she had worked with from time to time. And Yeshi Newman came and helped support me through that difficult pregnancy, and also helped me deliver my baby naturally. And so what was powerful for me there were two things. One, she had said, you have to trust your body, which I had completely lost trust in, right? It had, quote, betrayed me. And she said, your body was designed to birth this baby. And sure enough, she helped me deliver this baby. And I realized that despite my complete exhaustion, that my body had a lot of energy, right, to birth this baby, and that it was somehow untapped. So that was a really big element of hope for me. The other thing she taught me was something that blew my mind when she told me. She asked me to describe my first labor and delivery, with my first daughter. And I did, and she said, well, when was it that you hit your wall? When was it when you said, I can't do this anymore, I can't take the pain anymore, just give me whatever drug? And I said, I remember very, very well, described it. And then she said, well, believe it or not, in all my years of midwifery, what I've learned is that when women hit that wall, it's usually not because of the pain. And I was like, what? What is she talking about? Of course it's the pain. And she said, no, it's often because, she said, contractions are intense. They're super intense, but they come and they go. What happens is if you are worried about the next contraction, or if you're, belaboring the last contraction, in those moments in between contractions, you're basically filling it up with another contraction, right? You're not even in the moment recognizing that things are peaceful, they're blissful, and that you can relax. And so that was really what took me through the labor and delivery the second time. But it became a metaphor and a guiding principle for me for my health challenges, because there were moments that were gentler. And could I be present enough to harness that and to relax into them, so that it wasn't a continuous lived experience of really severe suffering.
What a beautiful life lesson that one can take with them no matter what's going on. Oh, my goodness.
Absolutely. I mean, I continue to use it now,
Mm-hmm. I bet. So, I'm sure the people reading your book will feel the same way, because that really brings into thought, it's like, gosh, this is just something that's happening in the moment. I can get through this.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Cynthia, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book, Brave New Medicine, and become part of your community?
They can find me on my website. It's cynthia-li.com. That's cynthia-li.com. And they can also find me on Facebook at Dr. Cynthia Li. Li's L-I as well.
Well, Cynthia, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Li. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your book, Brave New Medicine. Brave New Medicine is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
If not me, then who? This ethos is driving the Travis Manion Foundation to empower veterans and families of fallen heroes to develop character in future generations. In 2007, Marine First Lieutenant Travis Manion was killed in Iraq while saving his wounded teammates. Travis's legacy lives on in the 5 words he spoke before leaving for his final deployment. If not me, then who? Guided by this mantra, veterans continue their service, developing strong relationships in the community, and thrive in their post-military lives. Visit TravisManion.org and ensure the character of our nation's heroes lives on in the next generation. If not me, then who?
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with our next special guest, Jacqueline Thea, and she's here to share with us her new book, Wake Up Your Fairy Grandmother Within. You're never too old to be young at heart. Now, Jacqueline is a licensed psychotherapist and dream counselor. She's a former professional guardian and conservator, registered nurse, and practitioner of harp therapy. She trained in shamanic studies and is here today to share with us her new book, Wake Up Your Fairy Grandmother Within. So let's welcome Jacqueline Thea.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. I mean, my goodness, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, last year I was experiencing a great loss in my life. My beloved companion, Prince, my charming greyhound, had just passed. I had rescued him from the track and had had him over 7 years. And I was just in deep grief. And in that time, I had a vision of a fairy grandmother who was kind of floating above my head with a magic wand, and she granted my true heart's desire. And my grief was transformed into joy because Prince came back to live in my heart. And so I wanted to sing and I wanted to dance. It was almost like, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. I wanted to click my heels. And then I heard the words, pass on the blessing. And I thought, who wouldn't want to be touched by a magic wand and have their true heart's desire be granted? And so the fairy grandmother inspired me. And it's not fairy godmother, and I think that's important. A lot of people just automatically say godmother. It's grandmother. And I just have such a sense of how important grandmothers are in our life. And there's such a special energy about them that we have with our grandchildren that sort of bypasses things that, we couldn't do with our children, that we can do with our grandchildren and grant their heart's desire. And so the fairy grandmother inspired me. And so I had a new mission in my old age. I'm 87 years old, and I felt like this is something that I can do. I can share this energy of the fairy grandmother with others. And so I was inspired, and there's nothing as dangerous as an old woman on fire. We have nothing to lose. We can go out and do what we want. And I have no 10-year plan. And so I have each day that I can fill with joy. And I believe that everyone has a spirit of joy within. And a lot of time, especially seniors, when we experience so much loss, that we forget about that. And that spirit of joy needs to be awakened. And I call that spirit of joy your fairy grandmother. So that's why I say, wake up your fairy grandmother within. And it's your spirit of joy. And we're never too old to be young at heart. And so that's that's the theme and the spirit, and that's what inspired me to write this little book. It's a small little book, and I just did it all in 1 year. And but I am excited about having that accomplishment done.
Oh, what a beautiful book. And you're right. It's a simple read, but it's such a powerful, little book. And I love how you share about how, about Prince and how the loss really affected you. Because I think a lot of times when we go through loss, people are just like, oh, you get over it, or it'll be okay, or it was just a dog, or whatever those stories are. And it really, loss is loss. And you got to this point where it's like you were able to move beyond that. And I think it will help so many people.
Yes, it's because, we say a dog's a dog and other people, but people who have pets really know they become like children. I lost my husband over 10 years ago, and I lost my oldest son just 2013. So that's, just about 6 years ago. And those were great losses. So now I was alone. And so this dog became, my companion. I had 3 cats and a dog. And last year I lost Prince, and I lost 2 cats. And then just a month ago, I lost my 3rd cat. She was 18 years old. But it's like, as we age, I think some of these things become, there are different relationships we have when they become your companions. And loss, is not just loss. It affects different people differently. We have a loss of health as we age. We have a loss of friends. We can become more isolated. And we really, I think, have to work at, when we can, keeping up that spirit of joy. And then for those people who can't, and that was really my goal for people who might be in assisted living or in retirement, that I might go to them. They may not be able to come out to seek all of the, companionship or relationships or socialization, but I believe that we can go to them and bring that. And so that's part of the goal of my book, is not just to be having book signings and expect people to come, because it's very hard to get people to come to book signings. And this particular population that I'm writing for probably would not be doing that anyhow. So instead of expecting people to come out and to me, I want to take this to them. And it's a whole different attitude I have. It's not about selling books. It's about taking this message to people who need it. And they may not even know they need it, because if you're depressed, you don't reach out. And so we can reach in. Yeah. And that's my goal.
Oh, what a beautiful goal that is. And especially to people who are in assisted living or living centers or nursing homes, a lot of times you're right, like getting out isn't really an option. So being able to go to them and have discussion, bring some joy to somebody, how important is that?
Yeah. Well, that's my goal, and that's what I'm going to be doing. And dressing up like the fairy grandmother, I have, this. I talk about it in my book. The way that a gown was just hanging in my closet for 25 years, and when I decided that I could do this and be the fairy grandmother, I found that gown and said, "Oh my goodness," and put it on. And I just found something. My daughter had a wand that she'd had for a party years ago, and she gave me, and I found a little crown to put on my head, and it was just like I had everything around me that I needed. And my sense is, when we're given a mission in life or something to do, some inspiration, that we have what we need within ourselves or around ourselves to meet that goal. We don't have to go running out, and Google on Amazon fairy grandmother outfit, and have somebody send it to me. I just needed to look around and see what I have here within myself and around me that can bring me joy, and then in turn help and bring some joy, wake up that joy in other people as well.
Oh, without a doubt, because it's your attitude that really brings it.
Well, it does, yeah, and I'm grateful. because not everyone my age has the ability to do what I'm doing and has the health and the strength. And so I am in total gratitude that I have that and want to keep that going. So I do keep walking. I do keep going out and going to the senior center and doing the exercises. And I'm even learning. I just took up learning to play the ukulele. I've had 3 lessons so far, but music is another way to reach seniors, especially people with dementia and maybe who don't remember, and you can't have a conversation with them. They seem to respond to music and to laughter. And so this is part of what I want to encourage with my visitations, and encourage other people to when we're reaching out to do that with not necessarily talking about what we've lost, but what we have. And so I think that's important.
Yeah, without a doubt. I love the story about your grandmother, Mary Jo, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about her with our listeners.
Well, my grandmother lived on a farm in Tennessee, and a real hillbilly, as they called them. They're Scots-Irish people who settled in the hills in the Tennessee, Kentucky area. And my grandmother was just, I didn't see her very often. I lived in Los Angeles, but my mother took me back there 2 or 3 times. And one of the things about my grandmother, I just had to laugh. I thought I'd do something nice for her when I was there, and I got up one morning. She was out, doing something in the yard, getting eggs or something, and so I made some coffee. And she came in, and I said, "Oh, Grandma," I says, "I made coffee for you." And she tasted the coffee, and she just looked at me, and she says, "Sakes alive, honey, this ain't nothing but scared water." She says, when she made coffee, it was like the spoon would stand up in it,
Oh, yeah. Scared water, huh?
Good thing. Scared water. So anyhow, my grandmother had this wonderful just way about her, just down-to-earth way. But the interesting thing was that the neighbors would all come when they had someone sick, especially someone who was close to death. They'd come and get my grandma, and she would go and sit with them. And she had a gift that she said that she could see a light over someone's head, and when they passed, the light went out. And she was what we call, I think, a spiritual midwife. She was able to sit and help people who were passing over and help guide them across, and then be a comfort to the family. And not everyone, is comfortable while work around people that are passing. But my grandmother had this wonderful gift, and she was just a down-to-earth, wonderful woman. And she had, the interesting thing was she had these thumbs that looked like big toes. These kind of smashed big thumbs, and they sort of went down in the family. They were genetically transferred, and so my daughter, I didn't get the thumbs, but my daughter did, and she's always been embarrassed about her thumbs until someone told her. She said, "Those look like fairy thumbs," and she says, "Oh, really?" She says, "Yes, those are fairy thumbs." So I said, "Well, that she inherited those from my grandmother," and I says, "We must have some fairy blood in our family." And my grandma would never say that, but I love the idea of that. And so I didn't get the fairy thumbs, but I got the gift of the Celtic people call that Anamacara, friend of the soul. And it seems that I got that gift, and I've been I've been called to do that. I've worked with hospice, I've done shamanic work, and I worked with my ancestors. And this gift of a spiritual midwife is sort of being able to walk between worlds and being comfortable with that those spiritual insights. But I love the idea that there's an enchantment about that. It's nothing really scary. It's just non-ordinary reality. And so that's the fairies and the spiritual guides and things live in. I'm a dream therapist too, and that just sort of fits in with that I really follow my dreams and can pay attention to that information that comes from the non-ordinary reality when we're asleep or when, however. And I think that includes having this vision of the fairy grandmother. It's all a part of my life. The non-ordinary reality and the ordinary reality sort of blend, and I feel like I kind of walk between worlds that way. And I do feel I got that gift from my very practical, wonderful grandma, Mary Jo. Yeah.
She sounds like such a just remarkable individual. And my goodness, being able to have a gift like that where you're able to help people make that transition, because a lot of times that can be a very scary thing.
Oh, yes. I've worked with hospice patients, and I mean, it's a unique. There's not everyone who can do that, and I believe that it is a gift, and if you have that ability, I think it's to be a friend of the soul. It's you really get more out of it than you ever give, because it's a gift, and I'm in total gratitude for that.
Yeah, without a doubt. My goodness. Well, and in your book, you talk about Prince and his life, and I love it because, as a past dog owner myself, my goodness, our little buddies, they stay with us and they have such a journey. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about Prince with us.
Well, Prince was raced in Florida, and he was a grade A racer, and he raced until he was 6 years old, which is at the top age for a racer. But the dogs are not treated well on the track. They never bond with anyone. They don't learn to play. They're just, they're let out of their out to eat and run around a little bit, but then mostly they're training on the track, and they have. They're just, it's just sad, and so when Prince was. When he was finished racing, they put him in a program called Second Chance at Life, and they do that for some of the greyhounds. And that program was with a women's prison in Florida. And the dogs go to the women's prison, and the prisoners get a second chance at life. They learn how to train animals. And, of course, then the dogs get a second chance at life because they're being trained to be a good dog, in parentheses, all the things that you do for training to be a good dog in order so that they might be adopted. And so Prince went through that program. So, I can only imagine this is the first time, it was for 6 weeks, that he was with a single person who really cared about him. And I don't know, of course, the woman who trained him, but I can only imagine a woman in prison who is isolated and for whatever reason is there, has not had a lot of love in her life either. And so I can just imagine, because I know how much I bonded with Prince, that I can imagine how much they bonded and the love that they could share together. But then at the end of the 6 weeks, Prince had to leave. And it's just hard to imagine what goes through an animal's mind with that kind of thing. It just depends how much you believe that animals, have a mind and can think. But if you've bonded with a dog or, cats or whatever, that there's a close connection that comes by being that they want to be with you. And Prince then had several experiences of being taken from there to a home where after about 6 months, there was, I don't know what happened, but there was, they moved and they had to give the dog back again to the association the Adoption Association for Greyhounds. And then he was kept in a foster home for a while. And by the time I wanted a dog, I wanted an older dog because I was 80 at the time. And I didn't want to have the dog outlive me. And so I wanted an older dog. And I went to the Greyhound people and I got him, and he was 7 years old then. and he'd been, in a couple foster homes and had this experience. So by the time they went all the way to Florida from Oregon, I live in Oregon, picked up the dog, they picked up several greyhounds and bring them back in a trailer to Oregon, all the way across the country. And then he went into another foster home while they're waiting, and he gets the vet and everything. So by the time he comes to me, he couldn't even look me in the eye. He would not keep eye contact with me because he didn't trust anybody by this time. He didn't know if I was just another person who was going to take him and give him back. And so it took almost a whole year. He had separation anxiety. He'd pee on the floor when I'd leave, and I'd put him, tried different things, but it just took time for him to learn to trust me. And I had 4 beds in the house, one in every room where I just would always want to be right by me wherever I was, in the kitchen or in the bedroom, wherever. And so we just had this wonderful bonding experience. And I took him to the dog park every day, and he never barked. And the only time I ever heard him bark was when 2 dogs were playing, of course, but rough playing. He thought they were fighting, and he would go and bark at them to try to separate them and try to run one of them off. And I called him the sheriff of the Ponderosa dog park. But he was 75 pounds, black, regal looking. His name was Getting Ahead on the track. And then when they took him off the track, they called him Frankie. And by the time I got him, I took one look, and he was such a regal, wonderful specimen, royal specimen. I said, "No, you're my prince. You're my Prince Charming." And 75 pounds, a big, regal looking dog. And people would just stop me all the time and ask me, "Is that a greyhound? Is that a greyhound?" Just, "Oh, thank you for rescuing the greyhounds." And so I just took him with me everywhere. I took him, in the car, but whenever I could, to take him in the stores, and I took him to the hairdresser. We went everywhere. And I just loved him. He just, and then of course at 75 pounds, as he got older, and his back end was trembling, and he couldn't jump anymore, and he fell a couple of times, and I was so afraid that he would hurt those long, thin legs he had. And, I had to quit taking him to the dog park because I couldn't lift him. It was just too much. And I got a ramp, but he didn't like the ramp. And so finally, we were walking up the stairs just about a year ago, a little over a year ago, in my backyard, going up to the canal, where we walked along the canal, and there's some stairs, and he fell, and I was holding him, and we both kind of fell down the stairs. And I knew that we could be hurt. He could be hurt. I could be hurt. And it was time to let him go. And so it was just a sad, of course, I called the vet. She came to the house so I could hold him. The cats, by that time, my 3 cats came and sat, and he'd become friends with them after a while. And we just, we sat and talked about Prince and his life and what a wonderful life he'd had. And I held him as the doctor was able to kind of gave him the shot, and he just fell asleep. And we just sat there for a long time. And finally the doctor listened, and she said, "He had such a strong heart." And I knew, that yes, he had such a strong heart. And he was gone. And that's, I said, the grief, it just left a hole in my soul. And so I couldn't, I was laying around on the beds, his beds on the floor, crying for several days. And then there was a meeting of some women that I wanted to go to. And I thought, well, it's better than laying here crying. And that's where I went. And that's when I had this vision of the fairy grandmother. And so it taught me that, I had to reach out to other people. I couldn't just lay there and cry by myself. And so as I reached out to other people, they in turn reached out to me. And this all happened, and I had this blessing of seeing the fairy grandmother there. And these were other women, other grandmothers, other older women who had such a love to share. And so this fairy grandmother appeared, and then I heard this voice that said, "Pass on the blessing." And so it's so important, I think, when we have loss to reach out to other people. And then, because they're there, there's support groups, there's people there who can be there for you. And then you have to accept the blessing. You have to be willing to believe. And this is a big part of it, to believe that the gift of life, the gift of joy is there. And when it comes, when it appears, to accept it. And then the third part is to pass it on. And that's the joy then that I have now. But whenever I lead a group of people, before the group is over, and we talk about my stories, and these little stories are my own stories, and encourage people to tell their own stories. But before we end, I always end with passing on the blessing. And I touch the person next to me, either with a magic wand or with my arm, and ask them, then they turn and pass it on to the next person, and they pass it on to the next person till we go around the circle and it comes back, and then I get the blessing back again. And so it's so important that we reach out, but also that we pass on the blessing and that we're not isolated. So that's the story that Prince gave me. And it's the way then that by telling that story that I can share that experience, and other people then remember their own stories, their own pets, their own loved ones they've lost. And but also then the fact that when Prince went over the Rainbow Bridge, which they call that, I don't know if you've heard that term, but a lot of people say when the animals pass, they pass over the Rainbow Bridge and they're there waiting for us. Well, in my story, I found out that Prince found out that he didn't have to stay on that side and he could come back across the Rainbow Bridge. He got his wings, came back across the Rainbow Bridge to live in my heart. And so he didn't have to wait over there for me. He came back to me, and that's the joy that I want to share, that bridge, we can walk back and forth across that bridge. And our loved ones or lost can come to us in our heart. They can come to us in our dreams. I've had many dreams of him and of my husband and of my son that have passed over. And so I know that their spirit is around, and there's a great joy in that as well.
Yeah. Well, and I so appreciate you sharing that story, because it just shows, love is love. And no matter what, that, goes across, all dimensions. And the ones that we love are always with us. And, being especially as gifted as you are, I'm sure that you see that also as you're helping people to make that transition and bringing joy to them, to people now, and letting them know, hey, you're young at heart. Let's keep going. Changes everything.
It does. It does. At the end of my stories, when I'm talking to people, I always bring a little boombox. I don't have all the fancy equipment, the iPods and everything. This fairy grandmother is a little technically challenged. So I have a little boombox, and I have a record in there of Frank Sinatra singing, fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you if you're young at heart. And I play that at the end of when I'm talking to people, and their eyes just light up, because usually the people I'm talking to are old enough to remember Frank Sinatra. And we all start singing, and it just, and then I sprinkle a little fairy dust around on everybody. And when I leave, everybody, has a smile on their face and a song in their heart. And I said, that's what I want to share. Yeah.
Oh, how beautiful is that? What are some final thoughts that you want our listeners to take away, not just from your journey, but also your book, Wake Up Your Fairy Grandmother Within?
Well, I'll tell you that I had kind of an epiphany as I finished writing the book. It was after writing the last story of Little Sunshine, and she had jumped up to live again, and it says hallelujah, that she had her sadness was transformed into joy. And after I finished writing that, I thought, you know what? And I wrote this on the back of the book. It's a gift of old age that allows us enough time, and there's enough water washed under the bridge to clear out the old psychological debris. And that's kind of what my book is about, is letting go of the old things that may have, that have come in our life that in our old, and we're so busy when we're working and raising families and everything, but when we get to the retirement age, this is a gift. And the time is a gift, and letting things go is a gift. And because we need to clear out all that old debris and wake up that spirit of joy, because then that allows us to live out our lives in peace. And how important it is that we don't get to that point when we're ready to die, when, someone like a friend of the soul or spiritual midwife or whoever is there ready to help us pass on, is that we're not going with a lot of grief and a lot of anger or a lot of things built up, that guilt and things like that. The gift of old age allows us time to let that go so we can live out our lives in peace. And so I'd say that that's one of the greatest gifts that writing this book gave to me, and that I would share that with others, that don't be afraid of old age. Look for the gifts and the positive, because they're there. They're there.
How beautiful is that? So where can people connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your book?
Well, I have a website, and it's with my name, www, and it's Jacqueline Thea .com. The book is available on, all the usual places, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all those places. Mostly what I'm doing now is here in the area where I live in Central Oregon, of going to the local facilities and offering. I have been to the senior center and other places giving speeches about this, and then offering to do groups. But people can get the book, and if you've read it through, at the end of the book, there's a whole discussion section. And you can read it alone and go over the questions. But I think it's wonderful to do that in a group, and especially, like I say, in some retirement communities, that you can find out how other people feel and you can be heard. And I think this is one of the most important things, is that we are heard and our stories are heard, and we can talk about that. In that kind of group setting, and the questions are there. There's a group of questions about each of the little stories I have, and they encourage us to look within and to help other people share the story and tell our own stories. And by the way, all of the money that I get from my books, I'm donating to the Alzheimer's Association, just because I can remember my stories, and I'm encouraging people to remember their stories, but the people who have Alzheimer's can't remember their stories. And so I'm donating this money to go to them in order for the research to go ahead, my little part, so to help find some kind of cure or help with that process. So, because those people can't remember their stories. So I feel an obligation to that. And I just gave a check for $674 that I've had in the last 3 months to the director of the Alzheimer's Association here in Bend, Oregon, because my little part that I can do for us, for those who can't remember. So,
well, Jacqueline, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, well, thank you for asking me, Marianne. I just really appreciate that and the opportunity to share. And I hope that, other people can wake up their own fairy grandmother. She's there, alive and well. It's a spirit, and it's a very precious Holy Spirit, I believe, that's within us all, that's waiting to wake up. And I encourage us all to every day to do that.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course to talk about your new book, Wake Up Your Fairy Grandmother Within. Jacqueline's book is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and select indie retailers. If they don't have it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.